Welcome to the YAHOWAH blog. We're going to continue our series on what we're calling the Antichrist. But before we begin, I would like to share a couple of thoughts. First is that I want to thank my friend Joe and also my wife Leah, Kevin, as well as Rich in particular, for their devotion to, under very difficult circumstances, presenting the new look for the YadaYah.com website. Our hope was to create a website that integrated the three forms of outreach today, that presented the books, but not in a static fashion, actually as page turners, where you feel like you actually had the book in front of you with all sorts of additional features, but literally in the form of a book. And that they would be presented within their series as the library. And there again, all free. And we achieved that. The second thing we wanted to do is to make the site a reflection of the YAHOWAH blog, since that is our primary outreach to God's people. And so there is a large presentation of one of the more recent programs, followed by a whole series of long form programs, and then a huge array of what we call shorts, which are presentations that have been cut to under 3 or 4 minutes typically. And so you have the opportunity just to listen, and that's so much easier on a telephone, on a cell phone today than it is to read. And they're presented right there on the site. They were actually all videos that were live streams. And while the live streams goes to a lot of different platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and X and others, these particular programs are all being shown from YouTube, since YouTube has the longest form of keeping those libraries intact. And yet you don't actually leave the site when you're watching the video on YouTube, which really makes the experience so much better. So you can watch a YouTube video, which is one of our live streams, but stay right there on the YadaYah.com site. The next thing that's going to be added to the site is a kind of a social media outreach that is as close to Facebook as we can make it, which has been a wonderful community for us to share ideas. And I'll have the opportunity to post pictures or illustrations and write copy about them, just as I do currently on Facebook and also on X. But the Facebook environment is just nicer. And we'll have that integrated into the site. And then over the next month, we'll continue to add a whole host of interesting features to the site. But it is clean. It is beautifully presented. It is going to be so much more interactive, already is, so much more user-friendly. And I appreciate the effort that everybody put into it, because it is something we have envisioned now for the past 5 or 6 months. We did have to launch it prior to testing it, which means that while all the content is there, some of the links are not yet resolved, which is things you would typically do before you take the site live. But this is the second point I want to make. We did, and you've heard me talk on the last few programs about a group of people that once presented themselves as overwhelmingly supportive. And almost to the point where it was uncomfortable. They were that supportive. And they called themselves a covenant, as if they were part of God's family. And when they turned away, and it all began with a woman who was clinically diagnosed by her own admission as being a psychopath, managed to lure a bunch of people away. And she is very focused on this, as are most psychopaths, at convincing people that she is the victim and that she is their friend. And she's really good at convincing people that she's the victim and deserved their support. And this is a woman that I did more for than anyone in her entire life, standing up for her, teaching her, supporting her, even financially contributing to her, protecting her. And this is her thanks. To become a ruthless, vindictive foe. But the other part of it is that the people that she took with us, which I'm glad they're all gone. I mean, thank God I don't have to spend eternity with them. So I'm thrilled they're all gone. But what is just so difficult for me to process is not their lack of ethics. It isn't their vindictiveness. It isn't the vitriol, the hate. It's that these are people who were in my company, who had direct access to the 35 books that I have written, who were listening to the many thousands of audio programs that I have done explaining the books and that I corresponded with in email, that are just genuinely stupid. And that, I guess that's the most frustrating part of all. If you're teaching people this enormous array of insights, pushing the boundaries of what has been known about God and his testimony beyond what anyone has ever done. And you've had all your cards laid face up on the table, so you showed them exactly how you were able to derive these translations and insights, and then the commentary, and they can't process any of it. I mean, literally, they are just complete dunderheads. Their arguments are so inane, it's almost difficult to discuss them. You heard my program perhaps downstairs in the Rainbow Studio yesterday when I mocked a half a dozen of their conclusions because there is nothing that they have thought through. It's just this pile of hypocrisy without substance. And every point they make to justify their position is demonstrably false, and they're constantly committing logical fallacies. And you wonder, oh my God, how is it that people this genuinely ignorant, irrational, immoral could have feigned their support and pretended as if they understood any of this? Well, it is a frustrating thing to be sure, but I do want to share that with you. Our plan going forward will be as it was previously. When someone wishes to go on and part company, our view is that's fine. Go ahead, do whatever you want to do. And if somebody that's actually made a contribution in the past, I'll take time out and say, thank you for your contribution in the past. We wish you all the luck going forward. It's been nice knowing you. And that would be it. So you really have to be belligerent. You really have to go way out of your way to be hostile for me then to respond to you again. And so the approach that I'm going to continue to take is the approach that Yahowah has taken, which is if somebody wants to be stupid and waste their lives, I don't really care. That doesn't mean anything to me. Go off and do whichever one of you want to do. Good riddance. Goodbye. If you want then to go beyond that, however, and demean this mission which God has assigned to reach his people, one which no one has undertaken previously, certainly not in the last 2,000 years, and one which, if not undone, would literally leave the earth destroyed, because there would be no Shabuah or Towrah harvest. There would be no Yom Kippurim return. There would be no restoration of the earth to the conditions of Eden. And God said as much in Malachi. if we were not to succeed in our collaborative effort, there'd be nothing left of the earth. So it's a rather important thing. It's very important to God. He wants to come back and have a wonderful family reunion. He wants his beloved son, Dode, to celebrate being king of a family. Now, fortunately, they've talked about what they have seen at the end, and they're pleased with the results. But for those who would go out of their way to undermine that effort, you have no choice but to expose them, mock them, condemn them. And that is Yahweh's approach 100% of the time. Yahweh never says, well, let's try to make peace with them. Let's accommodate them. Let's negotiate with them. Never. And Yahweh never says, no, we're just going to walk away and goodbye, good riddance, never see you again. Nope, he doesn't do that. And our job is to follow Yahweh's lead. So we will ignore them when they allow it, and we will openly criticize them when they necessitate it. And that will be our continued approach in this regard. But I can tell you, as I shared with my wife earlier today, that I expected rabbis to be vicious because we're undermining them. We're showing that they are the ultimate enemy of Jews. I expected Christians to be vicious because I proved that Jesus never existed and that David was the actual Messiah and Son of God who was crucified to fulfill Passover in 33 CE. I have experienced thousands of death threats, so I always have known that Muslims would attack. What I didn't expect was to experience what Moshe experienced when his own brother and sister tried to undermine him and demean him and then speak over him. Or that his own people would pester him to the point where he said, God, I just want you to kill me. I can't deal with them anymore. I guess I should have figured that out based upon the testimony in the Torah and prophets. But nonetheless, it is quite a frustration. But, then again, since everyone in God's story had to deal with fractured families, badly fractured families, and none more so than Yahweh. And it has been the story of he and his relationship with his people from the very beginning. He's starting with Abraham and being essentially unrelenting all the way through the process. There really is no way that we can have empathy and speak passionately for Yahweh without having experienced the same thing. It is very much like Yahweh asking Hosea to marry a religious prostitute, a temple whore, so that he would know what it's like to be married to Israel, and why Yahweh had to divorce Israel, and why Yahweh said, they are no longer my children. I'm going to sit this one out. I'm going to heaven. They are on their own. When they choose to return to me, I will return to them. And that is what our mission is. It is a mission that no one has ever succeeded in, which is to get the attention of Israel, to reintroduce Yahweh's name to his people, to reacquaint them with the fact that the actual Messiah and Son of God, who is our Savior, who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim in 33 CE, and his second of three lives is Dode to David, and that he is our returning king. That is our mission. And collaboratively working with God, we will succeed. Well, in the current series that we last spoke of a few days ago, we were just concluding the 7th chapter of Daniel. We began actually in the 12th chapter because there are just so many direct hits on time. And the moment you start to know all of those milestones in time, you can't keep it a secret. You need to disclose. And that's our whole thing. As we learn, we share. We don't keep secrets around here. You know what we know, because it's important for you to know. Otherwise, Yahweh wouldn't have said so. And where we were on Daniel 7 is the following words. It says, then sovereignty. This is now upon Yom Kippurim and Dod's return, where the adulterous woman has been purged by the red heifer, and the wedding can take place between the returning groom. This is the story of the adulterous woman in Numbers 5, having benefited from the sacrifice of the bull in Numbers 19, Adamah Parah, such that she can be betrothed to Dod, and there is reconciliation. And because the children, this remnant of Israel, is being wed to Dod, who is king, well, that makes the following true. Then sovereignty and empowerment, along with a plethora of rights, including the highest status and an increase in magnitude, will be for those who will reign under the entirety of the heavens. And this will be given to the set-apart family of Elyon, the right hand of the Almighty, who is none other than King Dod. His kingdom and sovereign power will be an everlasting and eternal right to lead. Now, the reason that it talks about the family, this returning remnant of Yisrael, and then goes to a singular person as their returning king, without naming him in this particular situation, is because he is named, if you're paying attention. That's why I expanded upon Elyon. English translations want to present Elyon as Almighty, but El is mighty one, and the own ending means all things pertaining to, and the Yod in there is the very hand of God. And Dod is the hand of God. He is all things pertaining to the hand of God. And we're told when Yahweh is concluding the 89th Psalm, which is one he wrote to his beloved son. And he says that his son will be returning with him as the Messiah and the King to an everlasting throne, and that when he returns, he will be as brilliant as the sun, well, because he is the greater luminary, in the presence of the moon for the Moed, because the lesser luminary is here to reflect his light, and that he will be Elyon. So in the Mizmor that is devoted entirely to Dod, David, God's beloved son, our Messiah, the former and returning king, Dod is called Elyon. So we're supposed to know that. I mean, that psalm was written in 968 BCE, exactly year 3000, when the cornerstone of the home for Yahweh's name, called a temple, was established on the Temple Mount. That is when the 89th Mizmor was disclosed, and this text, Daniel, was written in the 6th century BCE, and therefore essentially 400 years thereafter. So in this text, you're supposed to know that because it was revealed previously. So his kingdom and sovereign power, this would be Dod's, will be an everlasting and eternal right to lead. And all of those who are empowered and authorized will respectfully approach and revere him, listening to him. Who are they going to be listening to? Who are they going to approach? Who are they going to revere? If you don't know these questions and the answers to these questions, why even carry the book of Daniel around? It's essential for you to know the answers to these questions. And those answers are that the one who is empowered ultimately as king is Dod, which causes many to be empowered underneath him because he is sharing his reign with us. And it is because he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim that we are there. Had he not extended our lives by fulfilling Passover, perfected us by taking our religious guilt into Sheol on Matzah, and included us in the covenant family during firstborn children, Bakurim, none of us would be there. So if you respect your soul, if you respect the fact that, well, now you're in heaven and you're celebrating this millennial Shabbat of Sukkah in the conditions of Eden with Yahowah, well, aren't you going to respect the person that made that possible? Revere him? Indeed. And wouldn't it be appropriate to listen to the songs that were sung by this very man, as he is the great lyricist of Yahowah and Yisrael? And now you know just a little bit of why Daniel in its entirety is the story of Dod. That's why when you read Daniel, Daniel's not a prophet. The prophet that comes to visit Daniel, his name is Gabriel, and Gabriel is Dod. It's God's most courageous and capable man. So we're being reminded that even though Dod is king, that we are co-regents with him. Initially, this mortal remnant of Yisrael is going to gain a plethora of rights, gain status pursuant to all others. And this is going to make it possible for them ultimately to inherit the universe and receive an enhanced capability and great empowerment from God himself. And we know that this is going to occur when Yahowah returns, and because he has revealed that he is doing this for Dod. If Dod returns as brilliant as the sun, he has been empowered to that extent. And as is the case with Dod, so is the case with other covenant members. What's also important here is that Palak serves to validate a conclusion that, well, I've made many times and previously. And when trying to understand why Dod would volunteer to serve as the Passover lamb, why would he allow Rome to crucify him? Why would he take our guilt into Sheol and endure the black hole? Why would he do those things? Well, there really are only three reasons to do them. And I think all of them matter. First, if you're going to come back and allow someone to take your physical body, bludgeon it, send you into Sheol, hell, and you're going to rely on them to have you come out, that says of Dod that he had the utmost confidence in Yahowah. And trusting and relying upon Yahowah is essential for all of us. And Dod had it to an extreme extent to be willing to go into Sheol, hell, with our guilt. The second reason is that the benefit is extraordinary. By doing so, many thousands of people will be given eternal life, will be perfected so they can enter Yahowah's presence, and they will be inheriting the universe as the sons and daughters of God. So it is an exceedingly generous and kind and magnificent thing to do, a gift. And number three, Dod knew that when Moshe, who was really an extraordinary individual, tried to lead the children of Israel over a 40-year period, that it was impossible. It was just one disastrous event after another. The children of Israel never respected Moshe. They were constantly cantankerous. And so Dod, by seeing that, and then by seeing himself, and he's a pretty stand-up guy. He's exceedingly articulate, handsome, brave, defended his people in 66 defensive battles, won all 66 of them. That's a pretty good resume, right? A man that's called the Son of God, a man that's anointed by God 3 times, the man that God said, he is my chosen one. It's pretty good credentials. And yet, Israel rebelled against him too. So he knew that it's not possible to lead Jews for 40 years, much less for an eternity. And so he knew he had to do something that would earn Israel's respect, such that it would be possible. And this is the answer. He fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. Now, if only we could get up more people to listen. Well, since this is a big job, and since Yahweh does not want anyone to work alone, we are encouraged and rewarded, respected even, for serving alongside of Yahweh's beloved. The best way to accomplish this is to listen to him and show our gratitude for what he has done. No one, including Moshe, has rivaled Dod's ability to lead and to teach. And no one has won Yahweh's heart to such an extent. We do well when we seek to emulate Dod, and we should all seek to do so. Just as Gabriel and Michael would tell Daniel in the end, at the conclusion of their last encounter, that this was not for him to understand. In fact, they told him, and us through them, that no one would understand these prophecies that we have now revealed 2 entire chapters of, the 12th and the 7th, until the restoring witness was able to decode them. And even then, it wouldn't be until right before the Shabuah harvest and the onset of the time of troubles. Listen. Here, at this time, along with the eternal and restoring witness, was the conclusion of this communication. As for me, Daniel, which means God is my means to decide between vindication and condemnation. When I thought about everything, contemplating their reasoning to the greatest extent possible, it alarmed and dismayed me. My countenance changed. While I judged these things for myself and preserved them in my mind and in my heart. This is Daniel 7:28. This is the opposite of my response to this. Yes, I can see how someone would be frustrated that it's going to be a very long time. And if they're witnessing these events, most of the events in Daniel take place in the last 7 years, which is a period from 2026 through 2033. And that's a long time, particularly when you're a slave in Babylon in the 6th century BCE. And that might have been dismaying to him. May have been dismaying for him that Israel was going to need these solutions put in place because they had been so belligerent, so obnoxious. It may have been that he was just frustrated that he couldn't understand any of it because he didn't. Maybe it was knowing that the story he was telling is that the 2 of the most important players in this story were going to be bludgeoned to death for God's people, their bodies anyway, their bashars, both the Dod and who is Gabriel and Michael, who is Yada, were both going to be bludgeoned. And maybe that was a bit horrifying. But it concludes by telling us everybody's going to be a sovereign, that everyone's going to be empowered, everyone's going to be enriched and emancipated. And so it is happily ever after in the end. So why be depressed? But even here we can learn an applicable lesson. Daniel did not go off half-cocked proclaiming what he had seen, since he did not understand it. There was no benefit in sharing it, so he didn't. I'm not sure he was even a prophet. I don't think he was, much less in a position to proselytize if that were something that God wants, which it isn't. And yet believers feel the need to promote their religion to acquire converts. It's the only thing that makes them feel like, well, if I can convince somebody else that what I believe is true, then it will solidify my beliefs. It's nonsense. This cult that has been so antagonizing to us, that's their goal. How many people can they pick away that believe them? Popularity is a loser if you're trying to assert truth. So this whole thing is mostly because growing popularity and acceptance is the only way to validate faith. When evidence and reason are counter to one's belief, disbelievers must replace believers for their religion to even survive. So Yahweh's approach is just the opposite. He routinely tells us to be different, to be set apart, and to be uncommon. And that means being anti-religious and apolitical. Rather than someone being validated based upon their popularity, having big numbers of followers on X or Facebook or YouTube. If they have huge followings on those places, then clearly they are not telling the truth. They're not communicating from Yahweh. You can't be popular and convey his testimony. If you did, you'd be lying. Common acceptance demonstrates that individual has veered from the truth. Now, the reason Torah means teaching is that Yahweh is providing instruction and equipping those who are eager to listen and to engage in his Bereth covenant and in his Mikra invitations to be called out and meet. Our verification of Yahweh's existence is derived from Shamar. And Shamar means to closely examine, and carefully consider what he has revealed in his prophetic testimony. The path to God is cerebral in our minds, such that we exercise our nesama, our conscience, to follow Yahweh's words as if they were a map to the promised land. Why we've mentioned nesama, I brought this up yesterday, but it bears repeating. There are people who say that Dode could not have been the Passover lamb because that would be human sacrifice. And they say that I cannot be the Adam Parah because that would be human sacrifice. But my point would be, do humans and animals both have bodies? Bashar. Yes, they do. They both have bodies. So separating, sacrificing one versus the other, if it's just a body, is really not much different. It's meat and something that's going to decay and die anyway. The second thing is, does a animal and a human do both animals and humans have souls? Nefeshes. The answer is yes. Both animals and humans are an animal, have a nefesh soul. Did Dode's nefesh soul, was it sacrificed on Passover? The answer is no, it was not. The nefesh soul is what took our guilt into Sheol and then rose to Yahweh in heaven. The thing that made and makes someone human so that they are distinct from animals, according to Yahweh, is a nesama, a conscience. Now, I don't think the majority of people today have them. And I don't think that the majority who have them use them. But there is this gift of a nesama, which is the ability to be discerning, to be discriminating, to be reasonable and rational, to be able to determine the difference between good and bad, right and wrong, fact and fiction. And it's our way to think our way to God. There is no example ever in the sacrifice that Dode made on Pesach, or that I will make as the red heifer on Teruah, of the nesama being sacrificed. And the nesama is the one thing that makes us human. So it is not human sacrifice. Dode and then I will give something up that is meaningless to us. Once we have transitioned to being spiritual beings in God's company, then a physical body It's just something we occupy on a temporary basis. And it just serves as a wonderful symbol of all the things I shared with you about why Dode decided to do it. The same things apply to why I will do it. Now, the proper process in knowing God is to be perceptive in order to know. Then we must think rationally to understand, making the proper connections between things to comprehend. And of course, everyone benefits when we share what we have discovered in the most revealing manner possible. However, there is no reason to throw Yah's pearls before swine, or even before those who you thought were part of your company and yet were unable to process what you were saying. It actually is a little knowledge is a very, very dangerous thing. That is what I have witnessed in this most recent family-oriented rebellion. Now, there was no one around Dode, I'm speaking now of Daniel, who would have benefited from knowing what was going to occur 2,001 or 2.5 millennia later, 2,500 years. Same thing would be true with Dode. When Dode wrote the 22nd Mizmor, explaining how he himself would be crucified to fulfill Passover, anybody that would have processed that he's going to do that and even understood what crucifixion was 700 years before it was invented, it's not going to benefit them. These prophecies are written for our time when it is of great benefit for us to know. So sharing this in Daniel's day would have made people angry because God's message, as it is today, is an affront to religious and political preferences. It would not even have done Yehudim any benefit. But that is really different now. When listening to Yahweh and coming to know what he said and understand what it means is the difference between life and death. Now, before we delve deeper into Daniel, and we're going to cover the 8th chapter and then the 9th, let's see what else that Dode, who is our teacher here, had to say about the 10 adversaries that would plague Israel. We have learned that the Towrahless one, whom we've come to know as Donald J. Trump, is going to have a 10 politician group. I call it the Big Ten Conference, the Fabulous Fools, if you will. And there are going to be 10 of them. And I have named those 10 previously. And it just is helpful since there is another list for us to consider it. The difference is that I think the lists, while similar in number, actually speak of different things, but they speak of the same time. So this is a really good exercise for us to pursue. So I want to take you into Mizmor, Psalm 83 at this time. And our king begins at the inception of the time of trouble with the Shabuah harvest, which is the catalyst that begins all of it. The Shabuah harvest is the catalyst that starts everything in Daniel in play. It begins with the Shabuah harvest. It concludes, in terms of the time of trouble, with Teruah, and then we find the celebration thereafter on Yom Kippurim in 33 CE. So Shabuah is the inception of all of this. And that would be Shabuah, either 6 or 7 years from Teruah and year 6,000 Yah, 2033. And so that you know that we have two ways of deducing which of these two Shabuah. And since both of the bits of information are compelling, it really is appropriate that we consider both. And the first is, we're told several times that there's a week of trouble for Israel, and then there's the discussion of halfway through that week, and a week would be 7 years, and Teruah in 2026 is a little over 7 years to Teruah in 2033. So that Shabuah is the 22nd of May in 2026, a Shabbat, of course. Now, in that case, it would mean that the Fakistanian state, the state of Islamic terrorism, would be gouged out of Israel by this 10-nation group, politicians from 10 different nations, to make Israel vulnerable, which is what we're seeing now with the likes of Macron and Starmer and others that are pursuing this approach. And it's going to be ultimately sealed by Donald Trump. He is the great betrayer. Now, that would all take place within the next 10 months. There's also the possibility, since we are told specifically that this time of anguish will be precisely 2,300 days long, that the Shabuah in question is the following year, which would be a Shabuah also on a Shabbat of June 11th in 2027. And so both of those two are possible, and that would mean that in that case, that this covenant with many that makes Israel indefensible would occur within 2 years' time. So that is the wiggle room. And I think it's by design. I have a pretty clear idea as to what's going to happen and when, but I think YAHOWAH specifically set it up this way so that these options remain, and therefore we don't get dogmatic, and we do everything we can as if we only have 10 more months before this harvest. But we also recognize that if we are granted another year, that we can accomplish so much more, and we have the fortitude to carry on and do an even more comprehensive job of fulfilling this mission. And so I think that is by design, to have a sense of urgency and intensity, but also a sense of resilience, so that we stay the course. All right, so this begins. A song, a shir, as a lyrical and musical composition concerning the gathering in of the harvest, ashaf, an ingathering, collecting produce from the fields and bringing in that which is reaped together into a storehouse. Isn't that marvelous? So we know that this is about a harvest. Now, there are 3 harvests among YAHOWAH's 7 Moed Mikre. The first of those was fulfilled by Dod in 33 CE, which is Bikurim, firstborn children. The second is this one we've been talking about, which is Shabuah, and Shabuah is a harvest of standing grain, and it will take place either on 22 May of 2026, a Shabbat, or 11 June, a Shabbat in 2027. So these are that would be the next harvest. And then the final harvest is actually a gleaning. It is a gleaning of olives, which means that it is for Yisrael and Yehudim, and that takes place on Towrah in year 6000 Yah 2033, and the harvest part of it would be on the 23rd of the month, the first day of the 7th month, 23rd of September in 2033. So a song as a lyrical and musical composition concerning the gathering in of a harvest. So if this is Shabuah, which makes the most sense because he's not going to write about Bikurim, because we aren't aware of anyone other than Dod that was actually harvested and gathered in as a result of Bikurim. Dod is the firstborn who celebrated firstborn children. So it has to be one of these next 2. And following Towrah is essentially the homecoming. So it's following Shabuah that would be interesting in terms of making this case. So while there are those who insist that this psalm was written by Asaph as opposed to about the harvest, there is no indication that he was a prophet, and proof abounds that Dod was the brightest and most articulate of them. I think we should be translating, not transliterating, Asaph. And doing so means that this Mizmor psalm pertains to the ingathering and harvest of the covenant family rather than to an otherwise unknown musician. In the feminine, Eshepha speaks of gathering and collecting individuals. Now, since Yahweh seldom interferes in human affairs, what follows must be addressing one of those special occurrences. And because there appears to be only one significant intercession between, or set between harvests and in the midst of the time of trouble, and it pertains to the arrival of the Towrahless one and then to the two witnesses. This is therefore directly related to the events that we considered in Daniel 7 and 12. Indeed, by the use of Domi, we find ourselves near the midpoint of the time of Jacob's troubles. God, at this, the midway point, do not remain silent or inactive. As you approach, please do not fail to take action against this evil scheme. Please do not come in peace, God. Mizmor Psalm 83:1. He means that the first 3 to 3.5 years of the time of trouble has been exceedingly violent and harsh for Israel. You know, we're told in the prophet Zechariah that 2 out of every 3 Jews are going to die. It's a horrible time. I mean, that means 10 million Jews dead. And so, as a prophet witnessing this, I was saying, or Dode is saying, God, don't remain inactive. Don't remain silent. You have to act to protect your people. And then he says, as you approach, don't fail to take action against this evil scheme. This evil scheme comes in 3 flavors, really. Flavor 1 is the Towrahless one himself and his cadre of devil's advocates. This would be Donald Trump and his political supporters who have relocated by this time to Israel. The United States is destroyed, and Israel is the only country that still will value Donald Trump. Who knows why, but the Jews are strange that way. And then the second is that Marxists around the world, and most young people have been indoctrinated in Marxism, have lost the ability to be judgmental, have lost the ability to exercise good judgment, to be moral. And as a result, they have created the environment around the world to promote anti-Semitism and to allow Muslims to ravage Jews worldwide. And the third, of course, the greatest menace of all is going to be that this is going to be the time of Alaska Flood 2.0, which will be 1,000 times worse than the first rendition. And think that through. In the first rendition, everybody in leadership of Israel should have been fired. You had several thousand, perhaps 4,000 jihadists, most of whom were on foot, some on bicycles, some on motor scooters, a few in the back of pickup trucks, who flooded into Israel as just ordinary Muslims. And they raped, tortured, abducted, and murdered 1,500 Jews in half a day, and were able to take some 250 back into Gaza during that time. And other than some gallant fighting along the border wall by the understaffed IDF troops that were there, lower level troops, there was no resistance that day. None. The IDF completely failed. Every senior officer in the IDF should have been fired that afternoon. Every single one should have either been fired or resigned. Every single one, including their Secretary of Defense. Every single officer in the Shin Bet and in the Mossad should have resigned that very day. And every senior individual in the Netanyahu government, including the prime minister and every rabbi, should have tendered their resignation that day. And Israel should have, at that point, become, for a period of time, a state under martial law, where the people have a referendum immediately on who's going to be the leader. And you disband everything else because you got to start from scratch. And there is no indication that the IDF, Shin Bet, or Mossad is any, or this government is any better prepared to thwart the next attack, Alaska Flood 2.0, which Muslims are talking openly about perpetrating. They have all the weapons they need for the wrong war. I don't know if Turkey and Iran decide to come in with warplanes and missiles and tanks, they're all set for that. But they're not set for Alaska 2.0, which is jihadists on motor scooters, foot, and pickup trucks. They don't know how to handle that at all. They have no clue how to stop it. And next time it's going to be 1,000 times worse. So Israel's really in a pickle. And the next time, it's not going to be just from that southern Gaza fence, because there will be the implementation of this two-state dissolution of Israel. And so they're going to come from inside Israel too. And they're going to come down from Turkey and from Syria and from Lebanon and from Jordan and from Saudi Arabia and onshore and from Egypt. It's going to be a massacre. So they're saying, God, you have to take action against this evil scheme. Don't come in peace. We don't want you to be quiet or calm, but instead angry. God. Now, this time is rapidly approaching. And during it, if Yahweh were to remain inactive, Israel would cease to exist. And life on this planet would be extinguished. I don't want you to feel comfortable if you're a Goyim living in the United States. Donald Trump is going to destroy America. It says that about the Towrahless one, that he destroys his own country. He's going to destroy America. And during this time, well, 2 out of every 3 Jews die. There's every indication that it's going to be worse for Goyim. This is going to be a bloodbath. Be total and complete economic collapse in many countries around the world. The United States is already bankrupt. And the weapons are going to be wielded horribly by people who are total and complete dunderheads. If you were to survey the heads of state in Europe and their desire to bludgeon Russia, and the leaders of the military-industrial complex in America who are talking about blaming Russia and holding Russia accountable for the Ukraine proxy war, you realize that's nobody thinking. No one's moral, no one's honest. And the very fact is that while he is not a good man, the only reason that the United States isn't already glowing is because Putin's shown restraint against the idiocy of Trump and Biden and the previous administrations and Europe. That's the reality of it. You may not like that, but it is the truth. So this is a horrible time, and it's going to get very, very bad before it gets better. And it says, for behold, your enemies are expressing their ongoing desires very loudly. Boy, isn't it true? I mean, you listen to what Muslims are saying. Their goal is to obliterate Israel, to kill every Jewish man, woman, and child, and to take over Europe and the United States, to have one Islamic fiefdom everywhere. And when you realize that the last time they played this game, they conquered everything from India all the way to Morocco and killed 200 million people in the process, which, to put that in perspective, was 1/3 of the planet's population. That would be like killing 2.5 to 3 million people, 3.5, 2.5 to 3 billion people today. And the Marxists, of course, and the other dunderheads will take care of the rest. They are shouting their desires very loudly. Those who hate you, those who loathe you, Yahweh, and despise you have raised their heads. You know what the sad truth is? You know the people that are the most responsible for encouraging hatred towards Yahweh? You know the answer to this? Rabbis. They're the ones that despise his name. They're the ones who write their words over his. They're the ones who have replaced the Torah with their Talmud. Rabbis hate Yahweh's testimony with a passion, and his name, and his son, and his Moed Mikre, and his covenant, all of it. That's the truth. They raise their heads. Yahweh's religious antagonists are seldom silent. They vociferously promote their lords, their prophets, their messiahs, and group, and they do so in a group and in overt animosity towards Yahweh and Yisrael. This is an interesting point of view, of course. While Yahweh never wants his children bowing down before him, raising one's head above the crowd to lead the masses away from this is, well, considered to be a condemnable offense. And yet it needs to be done. Said another way, those who rise up against God and his people are now going to find themselves bowing down in judgment in the end. And that those who they try to get to bow will stand in the end. Now, connecting the previous statements with the next one, it is interesting that the enemies of Yisrael are also the foes of Yahweh. If you would like proof, bring up Yahweh's name, his Torah, Israel or Jews in the company of the overtly religious or political, and watch how they respond. They're almost sure to express the kind of hatred that they claim to renounce. This reads, against your family and people. They are crafty and cunning. They confide with one another in their assemblies with regard to their conspiratorial plans. And they deliberate and plot and scheme. And then they decide to act in defiance. And they do so against those you treasure. Psalm 83:3. I'm going to politely disagree with my king in this case. And it just may be because he was looking at this and assuming that his people are smart and they're ravaging his people. Therefore, this evil religion that is so despicable, Islam, must be really clever. And the difference is, I've written the 5 volumes of goddamn religion about them. I know Allah and Muhammad as well as anyone in human history, and the Quran and the Hadith and the first Muslims. And I know that while Hasatan was described as crafty, more cunning than anyone at the time that he fooled Chawah in the garden, and there weren't a whole lot of people at the time, and there wasn't a lot of knowledge at the time. The tree of knowledge had just been breached for a moment at that time. And so wasn't much competition to be the most of anything. And over time, Satan's relative position as crafty and cunning has declined. And the Quran, I'm here to tell you, is the dumbest book ever written. And I'm also here to tell you that Paul, who admitted he was demon-possessed and was called the plague of death by Yahweh, the frequency of his rational fallacies is frightening that anyone believes him. And he doesn't quote a single citation from Yahweh's Torah and prophets accurately. He miscites them all. He misappropriates them all. He takes them out of context to create the opposite impression of what God actually said. He is an absolute dunderhead. And so I don't see crafty and cunning. And then when you realize that it was Alaska flood that caused all of this, and that it will be Alaska flood 2.0 that will cause this carnage, the average IQ of a Muslim is just slightly above half-tart. In Gaza, it's about 60. For Israel to have been played for a fool and to have lost the war, not only of public opinion, but actually the war in Gaza, to the point now that they're forced to feed those who are committed to killing them. And they're being condemned for genocide by against a foe that is actually trying to commit genocide against them and has been doing so for 14 centuries. How do you paint yourself into that terrible a position where you're feeding your enemy that is trying to kill you, and you're fighting a war where the goals of that war are impossible, and you're making yourself more vulnerable every day because you're hated around the world? How do smart people paint themselves into such a terrible position and then let it happen again and again and again? So Dode saw it, and he said, well, he's not an expert on Islam. Islam wouldn't exist for a long time. I am. And he just flat out said, I have smart people. There's no way that they would be totally overwhelmed and lose this badly unless the plot against them was clever and cunning. But it's not. It's just that Israel has forfeited it. My last 10 posts on X were all pro-Israel sites that were complaining about somebody, a Jew being burned alive, a Jew being a whole family murdered and together, someone being tortured to death in captivity, somebody being tortured to death and their body hauled into captivity. And they all were blaming Palestinians and Hamas. And you just say, so long as you give credence to the concept of a Palestinian, and so long as you blame Hamas as opposed to the actual villain that has been trying to kill you for 1,400 years, you are guaranteed to lose. And they are. And you can't get their attention. Not one of them. I'm sure Dode didn't have the wherewithal at this moment to see that. But that's why he has a herald. It's my job. It says they confide with one another in their assemblies with regard to their conspiratorial plans. Well, they do. They're Qatar, and for example, and Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are all funding Israel's demise. They have collectively bought the president of the United States. They own him. Gave Donald Trump, that we know of, that he has admitted to, $16.5 billion. They own him. They have conspired together. And now you look at the heads of states that are so unpopular in Europe, and they are all conspiring against Israel. All of them. You hear every day that, we're going to vote for a Palestinian state. Well, there are no Palestinians. And the Muslims are the perpetrators of genocide and apartheid. And they're the ones tearing Europe to pieces. They deliberate, they plot, they scheme. Then in defiance, they decide to act against those you treasure. So this certainly sounds like back channels preceding meetings within the Security Council of the United Nations or among various kings and emirs in Islam as the despots, the tyrants that run those countries. By the way, there is a considerable amount of research, and I just think this is interesting. One of the names that is the most prevalent in the Epstein files is MBS, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, who is a sexual pervert and a mass murderer. And he is likely one of the largest contributors to Epstein because he likes little slave girls. And the part that is really interesting is that Khashoggi, who is presented as this freelance journalist who had the courage to speak out against MBS, turns out he's not the little sweetheart that he is made out to be. According to the research that I have seen, he liked to dabble in not only arms trade, but human trafficking. And he knew where all the bodies were buried in terms of the illegal black market arm trade into the hands of jihadists and also the hands of Saudi Arabia, as well as the trafficking of little girls as slaves, as sex slaves. And because he knew where the bodies were buried, where he knew whose hands and fingerprints were on all of this, that's why he was killed. And that's why once he was killed, no one wanted to make a big deal of it because they didn't want to disclose what they knew he knew. Now, in this, we're likely to see witnessing this international plot, particularly among Muslims and among Marxists, to thin Israel at the waist, thinning the nation such that it becomes indefensible, which leads to the final invasion of Israel and this horrible war, Alaska Flood 2.0. And I like to use the term Alaska Flood because, well, they created it. It speaks of Alaska Mosque, that is the scar on the Temple Mount, that is the single most embarrassing moment in the entire Islamic story, about the wild ass ride from Kaabaville to the Temple Mount, because the only way you can get to Allah in heaven is through Jerusalem. And that the first step from the temple, which didn't exist at the time, but Muhammad wasn't smart enough to know that, to heaven went through hell. And in hell, it was filled with women hanging by their breasts from meat hooks. And this is Islam. So it is, Alaska Mosque is just the ultimate embarrassment and the most effective weapon that can be wielded against Islam is the whole story of the Knight's journey in Alaska Mosque. And by not knowing it and by not using it and not destroying it, Israel has made a horrific blunder. And so I like that term also because the prophets, particularly Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and Yoel, Yahweh's God, speak of this final influx. And there's only one battle. There is no battle of Armageddon. There is no Gog and Magog war. That's all poppycock from the book of Ezekiel, who is a false prophet. This is all an Islamic assault, and it's all terrorists, and they're all on foot, and they come into Israel as a black plague over the hills, as if it were a flood, a tsunami of jihadists. And so the term flood is used by the prophets, and here they call it Alaska Flood. What follows is what Muslims have wanted and viciously expressed since Muhammad became the messenger of Satan nearly 1,400 years ago. It reads, they say, we want to annihilate them as a nation, such that the name of Yisrael is no longer remembered ever again throughout time. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free Palestine. You know what that means? Obliterate Israel. Marxists are screaming it. Muslims are screaming it. It is the most piercing and repetitive scream in the world today. And here you had Dode write this prophecy 3,000 years ago that Israel is no longer remembered ever again throughout time. That is an extraordinary prophecy. And they say, we want to annihilate them as a nation, such that the name of Israel is no longer remembered ever again throughout time. And they're going to come really close. Now, this is the curse of Islam, of course, with Marxists having joined their hideous chorus. It is the message behind Free Palestine. Should there have been any reluctance to accept the realization that the foes who are seeking to destroy Israel are Muslims, we can now lay that claim to rest. While the Romans and the Nazis were hell-bent on enslaving and annihilating Jews, only Islam seeks, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The Nazis wanted to use Jews to rob them and kill them, but they had no interest in Israel. Muslims want it for no other purpose than to demonstrate that their religion and God are superior to Israel and Yahweh. They simply want to annihilate God's people. That is their only goal. Now, Hadrian didn't consult with anyone when he initiated his plan to convert Jerusalem into a playground for his legions. However, his preference was to enslave Jews rather than annihilate them, purely for economic reasons. And the same thing was true with Vespasian and Titus. Assyria and Babylon, even Egypt, wanted slaves and booty too, but they had no interest in the nation. The Greeks hardly knew the country existed, but it is Quranic for Muslims to commit their lives to wiping Israel off the face of the earth while annihilating Yehudim. This is the message of the 33rd surah of the Quran. It is undeniable. Now, to be fair and to place the blame where it rightly belongs, it was Rome which replaced the name Yahudah with Philistia, Palestine. But there was no Israel when Rome trashed the temple and the land. Israel had been obliterated by the Assyrians circa 700 BCE. So this does not apply to Rome. Moreover, Hadrian was sneaky, and he never actually made this claim. But Muslims do. And with this, we will conclude our program. For they deliberate, they plan, and they decide, they plot, and they propose, they determine together in one accord, Marxists and Muslims, that they're going to cut a treaty against you. This is the same treaty that is discussed in that 9th chapter of Daniel, when it is Dode that is explaining that in that beginning of that time of trouble, there will be a treaty cut against Israel that is affirmed by many. It is then brought up here in the 83rd Psalm. It is also featured in the 17th chapter of Isaiah. And so it is the exact same event. And Isaiah, he says happens right before the Shabuah harvest. We're told the same thing also in Daniel. So we know the timing. And Isaiah went one step further. Isaiah in the 18th chapter directed our attention to the perpetrator, giving us some 70 attributes that fit Donald Trump in the United States. And in Daniel, we have exactly the same thing, a description of the, what I call copper confabulator. We have the same thing in Ezekiel. All of them point to the same individual and same timing when Israel is destroyed by this two-state solution. So I thank you for listening. Look forward to being with you this time. Please, as you have time, check out the new YAHOWAH.com website. Hopefully we'll get the links straightened out, where you're going to find the books are page turners with a lot of interesting features in them, beautifully redesigned covers for them, and much more enjoyable to read, and an instant access right there on your phone or your tablet or your television or your computer, however you would like to visit websites. The YouTube videos of these programs, even the shorts that we have shared, all of it integrated for you as one place where you can come to celebrate all things Yahweh. So thank you for listening. We look forward to being with you tomorrow.